Welcome today to our virtual boardroom titled Evolve or Else Human-Centered Leadership Empowering Teams in a Digital Era, that is being facilitated by HR Recruit and Gary Coxon. My name is Jo Thompson. I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Gary, who will introduce himself shortly. Gary is going to explore leadership practices that are essential in today's technology-driven workplace, focusing on empathy, trust and empowerment as the cornerstones of successful team dynamics. If you've got any burning questions during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility and we will try and cover them as we go along. If not, we will cover them at the end. I'm now going to hand you over to Gary, who will introduce himself and start the session. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Hello, everybody. Really nice to be here today. What are we going to cover today? Well, as Joe said, you know the title of the session. It's about making sure that leaders know what's changed in the world of work and what that means for their skill set, their mindset, and the knowledge base as well. Because I think that what made somebody a great leader in a predominantly face-to-face world of work is not enough. Keep them being a great leader when the world of work has changed around them with hybrid and remote working and lots of other things besides. So in this session over the next 50 to 55 minutes, I'm going to look at leadership practices that I consider to be essential in today's technology-enabled workplace, focusing on some of the softer skills like empathy, trust, and empowerment, as well as the cornerstones of effective team dynamics. I'm going to consider ideas around changing your own approach to leadership as well, and upskilling leaders who you work with in your organizations too, as well as being more able to assess the quality of hybrid leadership in your organization. So that's the plan over the next 50 to 55 minutes. And we're going to be making heavy use of chat today. So if you've got comments and you've got questions, then do throw them into chat. I'll aim to cover them as I go along, but there'll be time at the end for a wrap up of questions as well. I've got a poll to share with you as well. And is there anything else I need to tell you about? I should probably introduce myself, really. So let's do that. Well, if you've not met me before and you want to stalk me on social media, then you'll see these kinds of things going on in my life. And from this, you can deduce a few things. I'm a father of four, I'm a husband of one, and I get a tiny bit of spare time. In that spare time, I run my own business and I work with organizations all over the world, helping to make work better. But that is a very broad church, and my background is in HR, L&D. I've got a quarter of a century's experience at director level in the public, private and voluntary sector, all around the northwest of the UK. And now my work, theoretically, takes me all over the world. And I say theoretically because it doesn't really. The people who I work with, they're all over the world in some really lovely places. And I'm usually stood here in a bedroom in my own house on a Teams call with them, which, if I'm honest with you, I was growing up imagining what running a global business might be like. It's not what I thought it was going to be, but it's the nature of the world of work we live in. We live in an increasingly digitally connected world of work. And some of you will know already that I've done a bit of research, some writing all about what work is nowadays. And I'll be sharing some of that research with you as part of this session today. And what you don't see on that image there is I've started a third book. And my third book, which will be out in November, December this year, is called The Squeezed Middle, and it's an examination of the role of a manager in the modern world of work. And some of the research that I'm doing just this very week on that, again, I'm going to share some of that with you as we go through today's session. So that's the aim of what we're going to do. So where do we start? I reckon we need to start by setting some context here. I think, and you may well agree with me, that managerial effectiveness is a key enabler of success in a modern organization. Managers, they can help to preserve and improve the culture of the organization. They can keep productivity and engagement at the optimum levels as well. But loads of managers struggle to adapt to what work is now for the majority of organizations, because that world of work, it has changed drastically. Managers' mindsets, managers' skill sets have not always kept pace with that change, and nor are they necessarily suitable for a digitally connected, distributed, hybrid workforce. But what do we mean by that? And what has changed? I think we're in a situation where we have definitely got a new ask of our leaders. Things have changed, but I've got a question for you. I'd be interested in your reflections on this. How? has that changed? And you can tell me in chat. So pop your comments in the chat panel, please, and I'll try and summarize them as I come through. But how do you think the role of a leader or a manager has changed? I don't know about the time frame you're considering this in, maybe just the last few years, perhaps, but maybe longer term as well. As I was doing a session yesterday, and I was talking on this topic about how the world of work has changed, and I was reflecting back on when I started work in 1993. My first job, I was an office junior in a solicitor's firm, and I earned £1 an hour, and I thought I was it. But the world of work was very different then. There was no email, there was no remote working. And the thing that surprised everybody who I spoke to yesterday is I remember smoking at your desk when you had ashtrays built into your desk. And nobody in the audience I was talking to was old enough to remember those days. So you can imagine how I felt with all of that as well. But what's changed from people saying, lots of people talking about flexibility and the allied concepts of remote and hybrid working, which yes, I agree with. Some people talking about the need to adapt and use different skills. And these are things that I'm going to reflect on today about what's prompting some of that. It's not just to do with remote working, there's other changes in the workplace as well. We talk about the need to support people's well-being. So people are talking about that too, which is something that has come much more to the forefront since the pandemic and much more important to people. People are seeing work and life side by side in the same place for the first time. And that changes your values, changes your approach to work, changes the psychological contract as well. And managers have got to adapt to that as well. We've got lots of different generations appearing in the workplace as well, which means that you can't really have a one size fits all approach to how you as a manager manage your team, because you could be dealing with somebody in their late teens and dealing with somebody in their late 60s. And that's a very different set of circumstances that those people have got as well. So that's loads of challenges for us all as well. And different types of connections, people are saying as well. And that's something we can reflect on today about how we connect with people in digitally distributed workforce. Can we do it the same way if we're not side by side with them? I think yes, but I'll come and unpick that for you a bit later. So loads of things going through my head now about what we see in the world of work and what's changing. And we have changed a lot. The world of work I entered in the mid 1990s, unrecognizable from the world of work that somebody would enter in 2025. And that means that the skills that a manager had, not necessarily as old as me, perhaps. I turned 50 this year, Joe. Can you imagine that? But managers, my skills need to adapt. And loads of managers, when they entered the workplace, came with a set of skills that they may not really need anymore. And there's more skills they need to pick up. So what are those? Let's explore some of those things. Well, I often explain face-to-face management as a very sensory experience. When you're co-located with somebody in the same location as them, you can see them, you can hear them. You get too close to them, maybe you can even smell them. But this gives you an idea of what your team is doing. But in a remote or a hybrid organization, and the CIPD say that 83% of organizations have some elements of hybrid working. When you're in that kind of environment, there is a sensory loss for managers. So they can't see everybody they used to all the time. They can't hear them. So that brings with it all the emotions, all the uncertainties that often come with such a sensory loss as well. But if one of us here were to lose one of our senses, our sight, our hearing, something else, you can adapt. You can learn new practices, learn new habits, and you can lead a very, very productive life as a result. You just change how you use all the other bits of information that come to you. You can't use that sense, but you use other senses. And that's a nice analogy for what management is in a remote and a hybrid world. There's been a sensory loss. You can't see and hear all of what you used to. The good news is you can still be a great manager despite that, because a remote worker hybrid worker, they generate way more data points than an on-site worker ever did or ever could. And that means that the information a manager needs to be able to manage effectively is still there, but it's not sensory information anymore. It's digital information. And we have to get managers aware of that. Some of them don't know what to look for, they don't know where to find it, and more importantly, they don't know what to do with it when they find it. So we have to give them support. And in my research, a lot of it anecdotal for the books, managers who've become managers in the last few years tend to be much more comfortable with, much more confident in dealing with people not being co-located with them because they've become a manager since the pandemic, and that's what management is to them. They've not had to unlearn anything. They've not had to relearn skills. So sometimes I find it's the more experienced, older generation of managers who are the ones who are struggling to adapt, who are going through this sensory deprivation. And that's a really interesting perspective there, that there's a shift in the generations of managers. But are managers coping well with what we've got? No, they're not. No, they're not. And these stats from Microsoft underline some of the challenges that managers are facing here. It's not an easy thing for many managers to manage people who you can't see because they've been so used to using that sensory data in order to lead and manage that they now don't get it and they can't think of another way. So we need to adapt our skill sets. And the other problem is this. Caught in the middle. And this is something I'm exploring with the research in my new book as well. But I think managers are very much a squeezed middle. They're trying to reconcile the needs of their team with the views held by some senior leaders in some organizations that we have to see everybody. We have to get people back on site because culture, collaboration, teamwork. And the individuals themselves may disagree with that, but the manager's caught in the middle of that. On those Microsoft stats, you saw some of the challenges facing. Microsoft also found 35% of managers have no strong view about whether their teams are on site or not, but the organization has a view and the managers have to follow that. So what do managers have to do? Well, if we go down the hybrid theme, and 83% of organizations have some kind of hybrid arrangement, then managers got to think that through carefully. You can't leave that kind of stuff to chance. It's way too important to leave to chance. But you can't overly structure and mandate it either. You need to do something in between, and managers are the ones who've got to make that kind of stuff work. They've got to get some people on site collaborating with each other in a way that works for them and the team and for everybody else. They've got to find ways of keeping connections going for the times that they're not together with their staff, so that everybody maintains what you might call their social capital. Managers have got to create a team dynamic that a team needs when they're not co-located with each other, when they're digitally distributed as well. So it's a big ask for managers, and very few managers have been given that level of support to know how to do all of those things. But it's not really new. This is management. It's just doing it through a different medium. Some of the things that I talk about that managers need, they're good practice in general, whether you're remote, hybrid, or face-to-face. But they become more important, more apparent, and need more prioritization in a remote and a hybrid environment. The good example of this is team dynamic. So for example, if you are co-located with your entire team, so you're all in the same place, the rules of how you work together, they're not written down anywhere. They're not even spoken out loud. You just pick them up by watching people. And that's all okay. And teams can become very high performing in a way. But the minute you've got any element of remote or hybrid working where you can't see people in order to observe what's going on, then those rules, they do need explicitly stated, whether that's out loud or written down or both, but they do need that focus putting on it, because if you can't see what's going on in the team, you have to have something to sense check what's going on in the team against. And I recommend doing things like team charters, and I've got some structures which help with that. But it changes who a manager is. Changes who a manager is. Managers have been used to being the hub around which on-site working revolves. They've been the conduit between the team and the organization. They've been the bottleneck for decision making. And the moment you start introducing asynchronous working principles into a team, it changes all of those things. The manager's no longer the hub. They're no longer the conduit. They're no longer the bottleneck. So what are they if they're not all of those things? And that's a really good question to start to examine, because loads of managers on an emotional level are struggling with how remote and hybrid working changes what management actually is. But this for me is a mindset shift from the work of the team being best done, or maybe only done, when they're all together at the same place at the same time, to distributed work that uses technology and asynchronous working principles to make work done in different places at different times, from using only sensory data to using wider forms of data and evidence. Managers need to adapt to that. They need to adapt. Why do they need to adapt? Because what we're increasingly seeing is a personalization of the employment relationship, the whole employee experience too. We do want to feel as an employee that we stand out, that we are noticed, that we are special, and we are treated in accordance with our own individual needs and circumstances. The CIPD comment on this in their responsible business report. They say, and I'll quote this, a greater sense of individualism and unwillingness to compromise on working habits that have become personal preference is what's facing most organizations. But simply, people have got so used to working when, where, and how they want to, and personalizing the work environment, that they don't want to go back to a more collective experience. They want work to flow around their life and not necessarily the other way around. But that means that our managers have got to be capable of creating individualized, personalized employee experiences when previously they've never had to even think about that. So I'm going to launch a poll that's going to ask you how well your managers are currently doing at that. So the poll is about to launch on screen for you here. There we go. That's launched on screen. Simple question. How good are your managers doing this? And we'll leave the poll up for about 30 seconds, and then I'll share the results with you and we can see what's coming from that. Now, I can see these results coming through live. You can't, but it's a really interesting set of results. I'm going to share them with you. I'll give you another 15 seconds for I close the poll down. Okay, 5 seconds left for those people who are still having a look at the question and considering their answer. It's going to close in 3, 2, 1, and I'm ending now. Look at this. This is interesting set of results, isn't it? Actually, not too surprising. Really. I was thinking we would have this kind of spike of things in the middle, and indeed we have. So most of us here are seeing some inconsistencies in how our managers are adapting to individual circumstances. And there's a fair number of people who reckon that 100% of their managers are rubbish. Well, that's an interesting perspective as well. Luckily, we've got a few people who reckon all the managers are perfect at it. Good. That's a really nice position to be in. But the great unwashed in the middle, there's inconsistencies. You've got some good managers. You've got a lot of different managers. And therefore, there's probably work to be done from a leadership and management development perspective in your organization to bring everybody up to the same level. Let's keep sharing this, and I'll give you some of my thoughts about what kinds of things need to happen to create that personalized management experience, employee experience. What kind of things do they need to agree? Well, I think each manager needs to agree with each individual certain key things. For example, the expectations about keeping in touch and communications and working arrangements. They need to agree that with each individual, not impose that on each individual. They also need to understand for each person what their signs of poor well-being might be, how you can discern that person's emotional state from digital communication. And it can be done, but everybody communicates digitally in a slightly different way. So that's a different set of expectations for each manager. You also need to agree with each individual what their working habits are, what their working practices. Are they healthy or not? What would be considered unhealthy for that person? And what do we do if we see it? We need to agree with each individual what needs to change if somebody's struggling. Do they need to come on site more? Do they need to be more remote? Do they need to sit with somebody? Do they need extra help? So, what do we need to do for that person? Going to be different than what we need to do for that person. So, we need to think about that as well. And then, how are we going to measure the performance of that individual based on the working practices and working habits they have? And maybe there's no one measure enables a manager to do that for one person because everybody has different tasks. And maybe it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And every bit of data you get is a piece of that jigsaw puzzle that you need to build the bigger picture. And managers need to think about where's all that data, that evidence about individuals going to come from. I'll give you some of those answers today because I mentioned earlier on that a remote or a hybrid worker generates way more data points than an on-site worker ever did or ever could. And I've already said that the difference is that's not sensory data, that's digital data. And that requires conscious effort on the part of managers to be aware of this, go looking for it, and use it effectively. You don't have to go looking for sensory data. If you sat with somebody, you can see things. You don't have to make a conscious effort to see and hear things. But in the world of work that 83% of organizations have got, you know, every digital interaction between an employee and the organization gives you some data to look at, but hardly any of that is in your HR system. Hardly any of it is in your L&D system. It's in different places. And the key is bringing that set of information together, correlating it with the stuff that is in your HR system, identifying patterns, trends, and then making decisions based on it. Let me give you some ideas of the types of data you might think about. In fact, no, let me ask you this question first before I tell you my thought. You can go into chat and answer this. It's a data, do you think, would help a manager to understand what their team is doing, what each individual is doing? Can you give me some suggestions in chat, please? What are you thinking about? And these are the less obvious data points. So this is stuff that isn't in your HR system. It isn't in your L&D system. What is it? Where is it? So let's see if you can think of anything. I've got a few things to share with you, but let's see what things you've got first. And we've got Nicola's gone first. Calendar booking entity. Yeah. So whether that's the Microsoft Outlook calendar or some other calendar, but looking at what schedule looked like, that's one. Customer success project updates, people talking to each other, the resource plan, what are they working on? Yeah, all of these are really, really useful. And what we see here, I'll give you the jigsaw analogy again. This is a 100-piece jigsaw. And every one of these things that you're suggesting here is a piece of that 100-piece jigsaw that tells you something. It doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you something. And if you can put it together with the other pieces, you start to build up a picture of how people are doing. But as you can see from all the things people are saying in chat here, lots of this is spread out across multiple systems. It's there, it's gettable, but it's not something you could just go into a system and run a report on just like that. You can't push a button and get all this. It requires some effort. But there's way more there. And this is a brilliant list, by the way. There's way more there than you would ever get from an on-site worker. way more. Some of them overlap, but well, not all of them do. So there's all these kinds of things there. So let me try and summarize some of the things I'm thinking about. I mentioned working habits before. Now, working habits, there's loads of data that you could be really useful to a manager that helps to understand the level of well-being a person's got and how productive they are. Think about an app like Microsoft Viva is a really good example, but there's plenty of others that analyze what somebody is doing and make suggestions about how to do that better or comment on working habits as well. And if you look at things like Microsoft Viva, as a manager, it can show you working hours distribution. It can show you the effectiveness of time of communication. It can show you the impact of healthy or unhealthy working practices. So there's a start point. The in-app productivity analysis is there. Then you've got your employee monitoring tools as well, which is a real double-edged sword and a controversial one as well, because are we talking here about employee surveillance? Well, possibly we are. Technology can be used in lots of different ways as well. Things like that can give you information, tracking, analysis on what people are doing in working hours and outside working hours. Now, looking at it in one way, that is definitely surveillance monitoring. But used in other ways, it gives you insights about productivity and well-being that a manager needs to have if you're lacking that sensory input from people as well. Now, you can do that by tracking behavioral data, usage, working times, browsing patterns, and loads more to understand about the employee experience and what they're doing and how they're doing it. And that gives you insights then into bottlenecks in processes, pain points in tasks, inefficiencies, as well as the emotional state of the hybrid worker. You might also look at location data. Location data. You know who comes on site and you know when they come on site. Data might be captured somewhere, but is it used to make decisions? It should be. So what you can do with that is you can see where people work when they come on site, who they work with when they come on site, what resources and equipment they use when they come on site. And if you combine that with your surveillance data, can show you some really interesting patterns as a manager, some trends that will show you where and when collaboration happens. And then you can see the results of that. And you could do the same for people who are remote, even if they're entirely remote, because then you look at server data, usage, and that will show you where and when focused work happens as well. And as a manager, you can then use that to distribute work across the week, across the team, much more effectively and make better use of the times when people do come on site. And then you've got all the apps you use to communicate, and people have mentioned some of these things as well. Give you even more data to spot and analyze volume of traffic, type of communication, platform of choice, frequency, duration of use, impact of communication, all be gleaned from looking at the platform itself and the data that's available there. So the back end of that, so your IT team probably need to get that for you, but it's there. And you could just do some light informal stalking as well on your internal social media channels. Nothing to stop you doing that. But that shows you who talks to who. And it shows you the impact that that has. That will enable you to map out as a manager the network diagram of your team to see who is at the center of what's going on in the team and who's on the fringes and whether that matters or not. And do we need to change anything? So it tells you a lot then about team dynamic, it tells you a lot about individual training needs and where you might need to do some more coaching conversations. It might also show you as a manager where you need to do more team building or create more collaborative opportunities, because you can see when the communication flow is done as well. And then you've got your HR systems, which a lot of that's static data, but it's useful because you can correlate that with all the things that we've been talking about to provide further analysis. Are the patterns that you're seeing happening for certain employees? Are they happening across a team or just to certain teams or across the whole organization? Is it restricted to new starters or people who've moved jobs or those who are on site more often or on site less often? Loads of interesting correlation you can have a look at there. You could look at the pain points that your employees are experiencing and see if they go onto your LMS, tackle that pain point. My guess is they probably don't, but your data will show you whether that's the case. So where do they go to get help? All that data's out there, and a manager needs to be able to gather all that data. It's a massive ask, you think? I've just told you about loads of bits of data, and in chat you told me about loads more as well. Are your managers equipped to deal with that data? Let's ask you that question. What do you think? Could your managers handle all that data? Yes or no in chat? Give me your view. Just a quick yes or no. Do you reckon your managers would be capable of using the types of data that I've been talking about? Yeah, yeah, I'm not surprised at this. If you look at balance of things coming through, the majority know right now. And that might be because they don't know this data. It might be that they do know, but they don't know where to get it. Or it might be they do know where to get it, but they can't be bothered or haven't got the time. There's all kinds of reasons why. But some managers will be there. And the point I'll make to you, and we'll explore this in a bit more detail, is that at the moment, lots of organizations are leaving this managerial capability and skill set a chance. It's out there. If you want to make hybrid working work, your managers have got to change. They've got to adapt. They've got to grow. And if you're responsible for developing managers, and lots of you will be, this is your stuff. This is the kind of stuff you need to be helping them with. So lots of managers will struggle. So where do we go? Well, I reckon this means that if we are developing leaders, we've got to develop them in a very different way than we have been developing them in the past. Because we know the world of work has changed. So I reckon we need to reboot leadership development, reboot it completely. Because those in management roles need to raise their game and mostly raise the game around things that are often labeled soft skills. Now, I don't like the term soft skills, but it's a well understood one, the intangible stuff. Now, I think in the world of work we inhabit now, it's the soft skills for managers that is the biggest determination of success or not. And that's what will mark out a great manager from somebody who is not so great. And we can't assume, we shouldn't assume that a manager who's been good at face-to-face management is going to be good at digital, remote, hybrid management. They might, but it's a skill set and mindset that's very, very different. It's a different world of work. So I reckon we reboot stuff. Now we could find that some managers, and you'll know some of these, they've got the skills that we've been talking about today. They know how to do this. That's fine. That is brilliant if that's the case. They've adapted, they're thriving, or they might just be lucky and they had the right skill set anyway. But I reckon you know a lot of managers who haven't. And currently, you might be leaving that kind of stuff to chance. And I don't think we really want to do that. I think with leadership development in the modern world of work, we have to be very intentional, very conscious, very deliberate about the way we approach it, the way we plan it as well. And if we're serious about making the new world of work a good one and pleasant experience, then the key people for us to focus our development are those managers in the middle, because they can make or break the whole employee experience. So managers need a reset. Now there's loads of methods that would go into creating the right learning experience for leaders. And I'm not going to talk about that, but the blend is the key. It's not just formal workshops, it's a community of practice, it's self-study resources, it's micro learning, it's all the different kinds of things that you'll be familiar with, and getting a wider range of possible things into your development program. But I want to talk a bit more about what to go into the program, not how it's delivered. So what do we mean by this? I said soft skills before. I'm relabeling them here into personal skills because I think when you've got a team that is remote or hybrid, as a manager, you have to be world class with your interpersonal skills in a way that you never had to be face to face. I'll give you an example. If you're face to face in the same office, building, room as your manager. You walk in there on a Monday morning and your manager looks at you. They might smile, they might nod, they might wave, they'll ask you what you did over the weekend, and nobody tells them to do that. The prompt for that comes from the sensory input of seeing you or hearing you arrive. But if you're remote and you turn up for work and you fire up your laptop on a Monday morning, your manager's not there to see you do that. So they need to have some explicit prompt to remind them to do that, or they need to be great human beings who automatically do that. Now, we know from your comments earlier on that not all of your managers are great human beings. So they need development, they need support, and they need guidance to show them what to do. Otherwise, they'll forget, they'll neglect these remote workers. Same is true of feedback. If you're in the same room as your manager, you do a great piece of work, your manager might smile, nod, give you a thumbs up, all kinds of things, because they've seen it, they've heard it. That's their prompt to do that. You do a great piece of work when you're just in your bedroom on your own on a call with somebody. Nobody sees it. Nobody sees it. Your manager doesn't know it's happened. So again, managers need to have processes, they need to have prompts, they need to have guidance to enable them to deliver feedback and recognition in the right way. Great human beings will do that naturally, but we know that not all your managers are great human beings. And we're also making an assumption here that all of this is funneled through a manager, feedback and recognition. I don't think it should be. I don't think it should be. It's unfair to create that bottleneck through manager. But if it's not the manager, who is it? Well, it's your teammates who should be doing all of that. That should be flow across the entire team of feedback and recognition. And that means the manager has got to coach those people to be able to do that better. And therefore, they need to know what good looks like. So they've got to have great interpersonal skills. So one thing, raise the manager's game, interpersonal skills or soft skills, call them what you like, but they need to be much better at it than they ever were. What else needs to change? Well, I mentioned before about team dynamics, and that's where I'm going with this as well, that managers need to help their team to understand how the team works. Now, there'll be people here in this room now who are specialists at this kind of stuff. This is your bread and butter if that's the case. But what we've got to do is spread that around the organization. Managers have got to do that. They need to facilitate sessions with their teams that cover how the team operates when they're not all in the same place at the same time. That could go badly wrong if it's left to chance. So managers need to cover things like expectations of how the team communicates with each other and works with each other, the process flow, the workflow across the different people, how to resolve conflict, how to solve problems. Where do we meet? When do we meet? How do we meet? What's the expectation around etiquette and behavior? How do we socialize with each other? What channels do we use to talk to each other about work stuff? What do we use to talk about non-work stuff? How do we review the effectiveness of the way the team is working when we're not all together at the same place at the same time? And more. I could go on, but you see where I'm going with this. I often recommend creating team charters to cover things like this. And if you're in a coordinating role, and many of you are from an HR perspective, you may see multiple team charters from each of the managers in your organization. And you can see whether there are then inconsistencies in how managers are operating across the organization. And you can do some work to standardize that, to build the consistency that makes a difference. Managers also need to share what team priorities are and where they may conflict with individual needs. What happens then? The team has to know that kind of stuff. And the manager's got to be the one who helps them to know that kind of stuff. So a manager needs to be great at building teams. And in a face-to-face world, you can usually just let that happen organically. In a remote and hybrid world, you can't. The managers have got to have that skill set as well. We've also got to be mindful of this, and I've mentioned asynchronous working principles a couple of times today. Asynchronous work is working at a time that suits you, but other people don't have to be doing their work at the same time. So that requires a different way of thinking, a different skill set and mindset from a manager. So communication is a good example of this. Communication can be synchronous. You know, if you're in your WhatsApp group chat and you type in and you get them dots at the bottom and it shows you somebody else is typing, that's synchronous communication. There'll be times when that kind of stuff is really helpful and, in fact, critical. But does it have to be a way? How does a manager get across the point that replies to communications can happen at any point and you don't have to reply straight away? And how do they get across the point that some does need to be straight away? They need to think about that, how they promote all these different working habits and coordinate all these working habits. Because I might want to send an email at 8 o'clock at night. But does that mean that you should read it at 8 o'clock at night? Probably not. But if it suits me to send it, it's okay. It might not suit you to read it. That kind of stuff needs explicitly stated. Well, then you need to decide about the activities and tasks. Do we need to meet to do something? Often, yes. But could that meeting be an email? Could that meeting be a voice note? Could that meeting be Teams channel with a discussion where everybody contributes over a longer period of time? That's what asynchronous working is all about. It's helping the individual to manage their workload and workflow without impacting that of the team. And some managers are really skilled at doing that. But most managers never learned this with face-to-face management. It was never a thing they needed to worry about. Now they do. So we need to upskill them on that. And in terms of learning new skills, I've been talking about managers learning new skills, but they need to encourage their team to learn new skills as well. If we're going to make best use of what AI offers us, which is a game changer for lots of tasks and lots of jobs, then that's going to disrupt the way work is done. It'll change when, where, how work is done, but also who does the work as well. And that means that roles will change, tasks will change. And no role in any organization can afford to have a rigid fit view of what that role will always be and the skill set may always be. They've got to build dynamic, agile, skills-based teams who can transfer tasks around the team, who can accommodate new tasks and let go of other tasks and see jobs being a fluid concept as opposed to a rigid concept. So in order for that to happen, the manager's got to have a really good understanding of the future skill requirements of their team and the current level of capabilities in their team and constantly prompt and promote their team to learn new skills, to adapt to a constantly changing environment and to replan and rethink work as they go along. Because if AI hasn't already changed the way you do some tasks, give it a few minutes and there'll be another generation along to do that. So it will happen. It will happen. But can your managers have that level of forward thinking and the ability to replan work? Yeah, they can, but they need some help on that. And then there's AI itself. Well, we've talked already about AI, but it's going to augment lots and lots of tasks done by humans or replace it completely. It'll reshape loads of jobs, loads of functions, and it will change what a leader does as well. So you may already have people experimenting with artificial intelligence in the workplace. You may already have written guidance and helped your managers to do that. And if you haven't, you should. Don't leave that to the IT team because this isn't about technology. This is about how people use technology, and we look after the people. So leaders can use AI as ways to examine how to make the team more efficient, how to make the team more innovative, how to speed up decision making in the team. And they're going to need help and support and guidance to do that. Yeah, you can leave them to experiment to a degree, but getting several managers together to experiment together and collating the results and sharing what they've done and working it out together is something that you and I, as people professionals, should be all over in our organization, where we make a huge difference in our roles. We give the guidance to make sure that the human aspect of organizational culture and organizational life are not sacrificed on the altar of technology. And the danger that if we just sit back and let it happen, then that's exactly what will happen. So, a question for you: what are you doing at the moment to prepare your leaders for the skills, the mindset that they need to have? So you can go into chat and tell me some of the things you've been doing. And it's also, I think, a perfectly acceptable answer to say nothing at all, because I think you wouldn't be alone if that's the case. But I'd be interested in what have you been doing? I think there will be quite a few people who say, nothing, Gary, no. Maybe you've heard some things today that are going to prompt a few conversations for you following this session, possibly. So Nigel's gone first. Mentoring. Yes, it's a good development option is mentoring. Really, really good, particularly when combined with other methods as well. So there's one thing. Guidance tools. Nicola is a good thing as well. Giving people templates, checklists, toolkits, things like that, that they can access in real time at the point of need, which is good as well. 360 feedback is another good one, Joe, as well. I like that too. So there's loads of good things going on, loads of good things going on. But we saw from the comments earlier on that it's a fairly inconsistent picture, and probably a work in progress is a good, apt description for it, that there's lots of things happening, but it's not there yet. And what I've tried to do today, and I'm moving towards the end of what we're covering today, is tell you a little bit about why leaders and managers need to change, and a little bit about how you might do that, what kind of things you might need to help them with as we adapt to the constantly changing modern world of work. So here's my key takeaways for this. Leaders have got to be adaptable. They've got to be willing to experiment with new stuff, new tools, new processes, new technology, and new team structures as well. They've got to focus on building that trust, connection, particularly if they've got a remote or a hybrid team as well. That means having individualized management relationships with each of their employees, which we've explored today, that take account of individual circumstances and give each person a voice within the team. They've got to focus on learning as well, because if the team doesn't adapt its skill sets, then it will very, very quickly be replaced by artificial intelligence. So they've got to make sure, or leaders have got to make sure, that their teams have access to learning and have protected time for their own development as well. And the leaders themselves need to role model the type of activity and lead by example with that. And then finally, about technology as well, they've got to leverage technology to improve the employee experience. There's loads of tools, loads of platforms that enhance communication, collaboration, feedback, loads of things. But there's too many. And the potential is for technology to overwhelm the employees, to overwhelm the team. So the role of a leader becomes one of balance, to balance the introduction and use of technology in a way that enhances what their employees do, rather than just replace what their employees do. And that's what I think the key role of leadership is. So, coming up towards the end of the session, and we can go into a much more general Q&A. I'm going to hand back over very shortly to Joe. And of course, I'm going to leave a picture of current two book on there because, well, that's my retirement plan. But you can throw questions into chat, or alternatively, click on raise hand and you can open your microphone. But for now, I shall hand back over to Joe.
Thanks, Gary. Lots of food for thought there. We do have a little bit of time if anyone's got any questions that they want to ask Gary. If you want to come off mute and ask, then feel free to do that. I'll just give it a few seconds, Gary. I'll just do the close, and then if anybody has got anything that they want to question, then they can put it into the chat box.
Okay.
So we will send out some correspondence to everyone that signed up for the event, and I'll put a post on LinkedIn. So if you'd like a copy of the slides or the recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post. Our next event is on Tuesday, the 4th of March at 12:30, and is called Leveraging Your Growth Mindset. A link to sign up for this will be included in the email. Otherwise, we do have accountancy recruit and FD recruit within the group if anybody is recruiting. But otherwise, I'd just like to say thanks very much to Gary for your time and effort in putting the event together, and thanks to everyone for tuning in.